Alrighty, this is Caroline of Brunswick and the Queen Caroline affair. So Caroline Amelia Elizabeth was born May 17th, 1768. She was born in Braunschweig, which in English is Brunswick, and inherited the title of Duchess. Her full title is Duchess of Brunswick Wolfenbüttel. She was born to Charles William Ferdinand and Princess Augusta. Caroline's family life from an early age was particularly turbulent. Her mother resented her father's open adultery, and she was tired of being a quote unquote shuttlecock between her parents. It was noted that whenever she was civil to one of them, she was scolded by the other. In her early life, governesses took on the job of educating her, and the only subject she received higher education in was music. And although Caroline could understand English and French, her father even admitted that she was lacking in education. Caroline was allowed extremely limited contact with the opposite sex, and whenever there were events in her home, she would be kept away from the windows. She was normally refused permission to attend balls and court functions, and when allowed, she was not allowed to dance. The isolation for her was so much that she once faked an illness to illustrate her frustrations. In doing so, she faked being pregnant and then told her mother, basically, so you're not going to let me go to a ball again? And that changed that. And in her early life, even scandals were still a big part of her life. She was often known to socialize, and there was a rumor that she was even pregnant at 15. This led people to believe this is why she had not married until a later age, because she was dealing with childbirth. She also would go out and visit the peasantries when she was a child and play, and in her later years, one of these visits may have resulted in a pregnancy, although it has never been proven definitively. Now we move on to the engagement to George IV, but at the time was known as Prince George. In 1794, Caroline was engaged to George, even though the two had never met. It should also be noted that the two were first cousins. A big reason for the engagement was because Prince George was very heavily in debt, about 630,000 pounds in debt. And George got engaged to Caroline, even though he was already secretly married to Maria Fitzherbert. Before the marriage, James Harris was sent to collect Caroline before the wedding. He described his initial thoughts of her in a diary and had less than favorable things to say. He said, "Pretty face, not expressive of softness, her figure not graceful, fine eyes, good hair, tolerable teeth, but going, fair hair, light eyebrows, good bust short. On closer acquaintance, he was decidedly unimpressed by the princess," confiding his reservations in his diary. Now, Prince George was also very much unimpressed by the sight of Caroline, and when he first saw her, he said, "I am not well, pray me a glass of brandy." So that's telling that he had to drink a lot when he first saw her. Ironically, Caroline was not too pleased at the sight of the prince either. The wedding night. The wedding ceremony went on as planned, but Prince George was reportedly so drunk he passed out on the floor after the ceremony, and it should be noted that he had drank for 3 days straight leading up to the wedding. Now, there was some turbulence in the marriage. The new couple only had intercourse about 3 times throughout the marriage, twice on the first night and once on the second night. And George wrote in a letter to a friend, "It required no small effort to conquer my aversion and overcome the disgust of her person." This was only in an effort to consummate a child, and 9 months later, their child was born, and she was named Charlotte. Uh, Charlotte was also taken away from Caroline. She was taken away, and Caroline was only about to see her for about 2 hours a week. Right after her birth, George changed his will and left everything to his secret wife, Maria. And he said in his will, Maria Fitzherbert, my wife, while Caroline was only left 1 shilling. Not too long after, gossip began to swirl about George and Caroline's marriage in the newspapers. The newspapers claimed that a lady, one of George's mistresses, Lady Jersey, opened, read, and distributed the contents of Caroline's private letters. Caroline despised Lady Jersey and could not visit or travel anywhere without George's permission. The press vilified George for his extravagance and luxury at a time of war and portrayed Caroline as a wronged wife. She was cheered for in the public and gained plaudits for her winning familiarity and easy open nature. George was dismayed at her popularity and his own unpopularity and felt trapped in a loveless marriage with a woman that he loathed. And with such thoughts, he wanted a separation. Now moving on to Caroline's affairs and scandals. Immediately after hearing from George that he wanted to separate, Caroline had multiple affairs. She was no longer constrained by her husband or, according to rumor, her marital vows. She entertained whomever she pleased. She flirted with Admiral Sir Sidney Smith and Captain Thomas Manby, and she may have had a brief relationship with the politician George Canning. She then moved to a private residence in London, where she was accused of harassing her neighbors. She had fallen out with Sir John and Lady Douglas, who claimed that Caroline had sent them obscene and harassing letters. Caroline was also accused of giving birth to an illegitimate child, whom she claimed was actually adopted. Now, as a result of all these allegations, the secret commission that ended up investigating these claims was called the Delicate Investigation. The commission decided there was, quote unquote, no foundation for these allegations, but despite being a supposedly secret investigation, it proved impossible to prevent gossip from spreading, and the news of the investigation leaked to the press. Caroline's conduct with her gentleman friends was considered improper, but there was no direct proof that she had been guilty, and more than anything other than flirtation. And this graphic on the screen here is meant to be a satire of Caroline's affair with a man of lesser nobility. Continuing on, after essentially being exiled by her husband, Caroline took up even more scandalous behavior. She apparently danced at a ball in Geneva, naked to the waist. She then hired Bartholomew Bergami as a servant, and it was rumored that they were lovers. Bergami ended up rising to the head of Caroline's household, and he openly ate lunches with Caroline. But despite this, there was no definitive proof of adultery that was found. Despite her behavior, she was still very much loved by the English people. Caroline ran into some problems later. In 1820, George III died, so Prince George is now King George IV. After hearing this, Caroline made her return to England and tried to claim her title as queen. When she arrived back in England on June 5th, riots broke out in her support. The king, however, still adamantly wanted a divorce, and the following day, he submitted evidence gathered of Caroline's adultery to Parliament. A bill was introduced to Parliament known as the Pains and Penalties Bill, claiming Caroline was guilty of adultery with Bergami, and it aimed to strip her of the title of queen consort and dissolve her marriage. The bill was eventually dropped because of its widespread unpopularity with the English people. After George failed to divorce Caroline, the English government bribed Caroline to leave. Caroline was offered $50,000, £50,000 a year in order to stay out of the country, which she accepted. George still wanted nothing to do with Caroline, and he denied her entry to his coronation. Shortly after the coronation service, Caroline fell very ill. That evening, Caroline felt unwell, and during the following 3 weeks, her condition only deteriorated, and she suffered severe abdominal pain. She was ill for 3 weeks, and it only got worse from there. As her death approached, she got all her affairs in order. Her papers, letters, memoirs, and notebooks were burned. She wrote a new will and settled her funeral arrangements. Caroline of Brunswick died on August 7th, 1821. Her physicians thought she had an intestinal obstruction, but she may have had cancer or maybe even poisoned. Her funeral was anything but orderly, and it resulted in two more people being killed. Her official funeral route was supposed to go through London, but as to not cause any more trouble, the route was apparently tried to be diverted, but the routes were blocked, and they forced the procession to go right back through London. Caroline's body eventually made it to a ship headed for Brunswick, Germany, and her final resting place is the Brunswick Cathedral. Alrighty, that just about does it. Here's a little look at my bibliography, and thank you for watching.